Isn't these drinks with the chemicals and all of this processed food, they call it, which, by the way, does, if you get really practical about this whole thing, it does cause all those diseases. Most of the diseases in our country aren't evident or weren't evident in this country before, as you know. Type 2 diabetes, heart disease. And why I do this is because the high cholesterol and the high blood pressure, because I had those ailments and they went away. And this is 15 years ago in my life. And it was due to the foods I was eating, the poisons in them. And again, there's always 50 ingredients in food. There should only be one. The others are chemicals, and they put chemicals in there with these scientific people and psychologists spend billions of dollars on research. There are chemicals that go into your brain and release the dopamine that are in all of these foods. All the synthetic sugar, which is so sweet that we don't even then desire the real wholesome vegetables and natural food. I have a list here. This to me, it's amazing. When you change your eating, these things taste so delicious, you wouldn't have it any other way. Like Brussels sprouts, there you go, broccoli, red cabbage, kale, carrots, snow peas, butter lettuce, spinach. These are all, leafy greens, the most healthiest things in vegetables. And you could go on and on. So, and the calories are in the processed foods. The restaurants, it's all processed, salt, oil, and sugar, SOS, right? We have I went to a lecture, and the guy who led the lecture, he says, you can walk out of that prison right now. We're in a prison. We're in isolation. Do you want to be in isolation in prison, or do you want to be free? So we have an opportunity to be free of this food addiction. It's just a perception change. These corporations did a number on us. And when we grew up, that's all we saw and knew. So, it's like cigarette smoking was, right? In the 1950s, the same deal. And then they finally, but the problem is, even on the food corporations, for the government, the FDA, most of the people there are from the big corporations, or after they leave there, they go on to the big corporations and the lobbyists and all of that. So we don't want to be a slave to them. See, this is the whole thing. The reason why we can't get out of this whole mess is because everything I went for, everything I see, and all of these self-help diet books and everything, and all of these corporations will give you the same food with the poison in it. It's the salt, oil, and sugar that's the problem. And the other books I read told me to control it. And I said I heard a lecture, and they had scientists there and doctors there and nutritionists. And I was listening on the internet a few weeks ago, and it was about an hour long. And they talked about all of these ways we can control it, we can do it. But I never heard the word spirituality. And I started to learn, even in my life, in my daily living, the only way out of my mess of the depression, anxiety, of fear of people was through a spiritual awakening. And when I bring my self-will back into the picture, I'm back into the self-centered fear. The same with this food situation. There's a spiritual solution to all our problems, and having that perception change, and again, not going back into, again, the defects of character, more shame and guilt. So when we have these moments when we backslide, and whatever it is in life, we can be successful, understanding that that's part of it, right? Very successful people, they say they tried 10 times, 9 times they failed. But most of us have the tendency, we want that perfection. It's really progress, not perfection, so we slide. So even if every day, and I use the water as an example, if you have more of an attitude towards the water and the clarity, the gift from God, and are able to substitute this for those drinks with 1,000, 1,200 calories, right? Substitute this. And have that whole change of understanding that. If you like the video and want to spread the message, press the like and subscribe button. Thank you. So we started to realize the more food we eat, the more pleasure we got, and then we got more and more, but never enough. We started to realize we got a promotion at work, and we figured, well, I got one, I'll get another one. Or we started to realize if I have my first $1 million, I'll be happy getting $2 or $10 million. It doesn't work, because on the other side is as much pain, because we're getting away from our center. Our center, which is the real bliss and joy, we're putting on making other things our higher conscious, our higher power. So start to perceive these things. Get this perception with the food. Do you realize that when you that a lot of it's related to what the corporations, they brainwashed us into thinking. So they told us to make food a higher power. They love that. They love telling us that. And with all of these things in life, the movie stars and all of these things, and we lust after these things. And the food, in our society, is so tough because they put these poisons in the food that really stimulate the brain and all of these things. But for what I do is I love, like I say, food that's wholesome, natural from God. I'm actually on a whole food plant-based diet, but I always say when I mention that, people could be, whatever diet you're on, the problem is what you put on the foods. And it all is thinking, because look at some cultures around the world. You could go and look and you'll see that everybody there is very thin, right? Because of the perception. It has nothing to do, people say, well, it's genetic, it's this and that. Maybe some cases it is. But how could a whole society be actually within what they call the goal weight, right? And we have what's called the SAD American diet, SAD. It's called Standard American Diet, SAD, or MAD, Modern American Diet. And we're inundated with the commercials, the way we grew up. So we have the strength in the spirituality and a way of faith is strength. And the world is what makes us miserable and happy. And our addiction to food, it's all about a material thing, the food. So worldly desires, things of the flesh, as they call, temptations, and finding our joy and happiness in things outside where our indwelling spirit is within. So I always talk about spiritual bread, being spiritual bread. And so it's in the unseen things, really, that we have our joy and happiness, and we can, not in the things we see or we hear. That all is related to the five senses or our addiction to food. The way out, and I always love this expression, the way out is in. We have a solution. It took me a long time to realize how these steps, I started to realize how the steps related in life, and I got along with people, and a lot of my resentments I got rid of, and then when I had them, I used to carry around resentments for years, and now I could get rid of them in a moment because of the spirituality in the program. Again, getting out of self, but also realizing that it's directly related, because in the big book, in many places, it says the answer to all our problems. So with the food addiction, again, it's making food a higher power. Looking for food. It's all about our obsession. And the other thing too is we have what's called a spiritual solution. A spiritual solution, because a lot of the solutions we have are still being in the world, worldly desires. We're trying to, through our intellect and through science and doctors and people trying to figure this problem out. And today in the modern age, they haven't figured it out yet. If anybody knows, I always say this at the meeting, come on and let me know if science has or these expensive diets you go on, and if they have cured you. Actually, 95 to 99% of these diets fail, and the 1% or 2% who stay on it are miserable, because the perception change, getting out of the worldly things, worldly desires, directly related to anything of temporal or pleasure, momentary pleasure. We have spiritual bread. We can look within and find our joy and happiness there. So directly related to the food, anytime I have these thoughts about obsessing and wanting food, I can start to slowly replace these with spiritual thoughts. The spiritual thoughts could be, for example, my body's God's temple, right? There's a good one. I want to get things from nature, the sunlight, my happiness and joy, and people. We go to affairs, right? And we make it all about the food. Everything's about the food. But really, that's missing all out on life. We don't feel the vibrations, the people around us, the love, the understanding, the compassion, because we're into the food. And then we become isolated, and it's related, again, to all our thinking. It becomes so we have a way out. And the way out is called a simple program, letting go and letting this higher consciousness in, which was in there all the time. In other words, the consciousness was there, but we sort of blocked it by all of this negative thinking. One of the most negative things that can relate to our addiction to food is the remorse, shame, and guilt. How many times I talk to people and all they talk about is yesterday, or for the last week, or for the whole year, I was in my addiction. I would say binging on food. And other people, there's also restricting food. It's a compulsion towards food. So we want to, include all of these things related to food addiction. It could be anorexia, or bulimia, or the binge eating, compulsive overeating. A lot of times we mention that because most of us are here with that problem. But the problem we bring in when we get back into the upset about it, we get into the remorse, shame, and guilt. The day before, we might have done 10 things good. We went through the day. I hear a lot of people say, well, I had a good abstinent breakfast and lunch was good. And then later in the night, forget about later in the night. Go back to the thoughts early in the day and the positiveness of everything. So 9 things you might have done well in the day, and then you fell a little bit, and then you bring it in. You could go slip and have relapse people have for, like we say, oh, I was in here 10 years ago, now I'm back. 10 years later. I don't need to wait 10 years. If I have a slip or something happens, I can, next moment or the next day, start the day over. I love that phrase. In the presence of my higher power. The only way we could be recovered from our addictions, and it says in the big book, dependent on our spiritual condition, the status of our spiritual condition. We are recovered but not cured. We recovered depending on what our spiritual condition. So some days I'm not so spiritual and some days I am. But to throw everything out like we do when we're in our addictions and say, oh, it's all over, I can't do this. With anything in life. The lessons we learn here are amazing because it applies to everything. If you want to be successful at something, you want to go out and do something. Some people will go out and the first venture they have, or say a salesperson, some people, they say 1 out of 100 people succeed in sales because most of us go on the premise that, oh, the first person says no, then it's all over. So it's really a daily thing, and being in a consciousness of this higher power, getting out of these worldly desires, putting up faith in things of nature and feeling vibrations around us and the happiness and joy that we're meant to have. The body, body is God's temple again. We'll know when we're out of the self-centered fear and trying to make food, trying to get the pleasure out of things like food and lusting or gluttony, right? We call it gluttony. Gluttony is one of 7 deadly sins, and the lustful, or greed, or envy, and all of these things are related to the ego and the self and those worldly desires. All the greed and jealousy comes from worldly desires. I know how I'm going to be happy. I'm going to do better at this. To get over this, there's only one way to do it. The other ways don't work. You see yourself. And in Doctor's opinion, in our book here, in our program, the 12-step program, he said the synthetic knowledge of the day, the scientists and doctors didn't work. And here we are, how many years later, almost 100 years later, and it still didn't work. It doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work because what we're trying to do, we're trying to enforce over with our self-will. Hey, look, I'll give you a good example. Your heart beats and the blood flows and everything in your body and the way you see, it's amazing, right? The miracle and gift of a higher consciousness, God of our understanding, right? So again, the perfection is there all the time. But when we try to take control of it, we make it unperfection, right? When you get a cut, it heals. If you try to fool around with it, if it gets dirt in it, whatever you try to do, God's gift is the way to do it. The same with this food addiction. The healing process, a spiritual awakening and realizing we'll intuitively know. And I love the 10-step promises. It says we'll stop fighting it. We won't even have sworn off, right? A position neutrality, safe and protected. Because when we're centered, you see, the problem as I see it is this. When we're trying to control the food, we're in self-centered fear. But fear really emanates a lot of times in your stomach. So you can't even feel these emotions and feelings with the food when you're full. Or, But when you let go and you meditate or pray and just feel, the emptiness, leanness in your body's God's temple, just that whole perception change, Actually, in the big book, it talks on page 25 about a spiritual awakening. And it says on page 25 in the second paragraph, the great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude towards life, towards our fellows, and towards God's universe. The essential fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that a Creator has entered into our hearts in a way which is indeed miraculous. The miraculous change, right? The change of thinking and perception, that's all it really is. When people say, well, I don't really understand what you're saying. And we agnostics, it talks about, for people who don't have any faith, it says, but you had, on page 54, it says, but you had faith all the time, it says, in worldly things, things of money and success. So we did have faith, but in the things of momentary and material things. So we can change that perception and not make the perception of the material food our higher power, but get our nutrition and health and everything from the sunlight, from nature, and just have, not live to eat, but eat to, just eat to live. So that's it. That's what we're doing. We're doing it all backwards. So we have to understand that we have a way out of this whole mess here. If you like the video and want to spread the message, press the like and subscribe button. Thank you. I just want to review all of this and know there's a way out, there's a solution to this problem, but also understand that And I found that the way that is most, Bill says in Bill's story, common sense becomes uncommon sense. So the way you would figure in life to figure this thing out, it doesn't work. And of course, all these diets fail, but there is a one way. And we need that perception change. Then you could enjoy your diet. Can you imagine that? All of a sudden, you have a different way of eating. You're losing the weight. You're getting healthy. But that's the way. Hey, even in this country, years ago, before the advertisements, the processed food, most people are 30, 40, at least pounds lighter in other countries. So we got to realize we have a real situation here. So you need all the strength and power, and it can't come from us. Our best thinking got us here. Our ego tells us, hey, this plate of food is going to make us feel great. There's only one way out, a spiritual solution. But step 3 is amazing, and that's where I find my happiness and joy. Not, it says of a God of our understanding, but my understanding was in my higher power was food, it was alcohol, it was drugs, it was people. So then we go wrong, and we wonder why we're so miserable, depressed, unhealthy, and killing ourselves, right? There is a solution. There is an answer, the spiritual solution. It's in these 12 steps. It's amazing, right? It took me, I don't know, I tried everything else in the program. We have, to no avail. When I picked up the big book and somebody took me through these steps through the big book, my life started to change. We're either in the problem or the solution. It's interesting. I can't multitask that well, which is great, because either I believe if I put all my faith in God or understand a higher power, then the other stuff, all the material things, the things of life become secondary. But I was making them primary. So God meant us to be happy and joyous. He meant us to know again, like I say, the body knows how to work. He meant us to know the right amount of food to eat. But he did give us the intellect, but we misuse it, right? In the book, it talks about self-will run riot. So we can rethink and get centered, and then intuitively know how much food to eat. There you go. We'll intuitively know. We'll make other things. We'll enjoy the day and people around us. It's amazing. It's a shift of thinking. We're being a slave to that when we can, fear God, right? Be God consciousness and spiritual, and feel that the nourishment coming from being nature, right? You don't need it or people or love, and not the food. The food is to sustain life, but not to make a higher power, not to make everything. You tell the truth. We have a partner who, it's like if you had a business and you had a customer who was really, tough, and you're really fearful, and then your partner says, yeah, I'll take care of it. I know how to deal with that. With anything in life. Then we could sit back and say, okay. But we could run life like that. We have a partner, it's just, life is great when we don't get it in our way. We get in our own way. That's the problem. What happened? I had to surrender finally with the drugs, alcohol, and the people, and them making me miserable, the resentment, anger. And one day I had to surrender. But the problem is, the next day I started to get back in. When I'm miserable, I'm back into the self. When I'm into the food, I'm back into the self. But we have this beautiful steps, 10, 11, and 12. Page 86, upon awakening and retiring at night and throughout the day. It tells us, the whole page says that we're getting back into self-will. We're trying to be the director to play and see how that works out. So, and all of these things, like I said, that I tried, trying to control it, self-help books telling me how to deal with people, trying to figure it out. None of the steps talks about figuring it out. It talks the opposite, letting go. But my common sense said, if you got to figure this out, we're in an age, when I grew up, we went to school, the age of intellect, of scientific and advancement, and all through the figuring it out. But billions of people in the world are spiritual for a reason, through the ages. A lot of times for all of these all these physical disorders related to the food, but also I started to realize all my, what you call mental things that I could think of, being anxious about the future coming up, or depressed about the past. I realized the solution was the eternal present. And it worked. It really works. All this stuff works. The spirituality, healing the mind is amazing. Getting rid of those resentments when you're upset during the day, and it's all about, actually, let me read that quickly. I don't like to do much reading, but on page 8 in Bill's story, what does Bill say? This is Bill, and this is our addiction when we're and related to your addictions now. And this is in the first paragraph on page 8. No words can tell the loneliness and despair I found in the bitter morass of self-pity, quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I met my match. I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol, we could say food, or any other people, was my master. You want to be master? You want to be a slave? You want to be in slavery? Right? Do you want to be a slave to all of these things? We can fill ourselves up with, say you're at a barbecue with nature and happiness and the people around you. So instead of the food, right, we use that. Fill yourself up with the joy, and after a while, boy, the perception changes and you start to see and not make food your higher power. It's all a spiritual solution. It's the only way out. The diet, you're trying to control it. You're saying, this is powerful. I need to control it. And the more you resist something, the more power you give it. Also, no matter where you're at now, it doesn't matter. Like we said, start the day over. Because the goal isn't to get to a goal weight. The goal is to be all the time, feel the joy and happiness, so we don't have to have all that gloopy food and fill ourselves up with these material things. It could be money, it could be success, all of these things that take us away from the real permanent joy and happiness that's from within. And it's interesting, all of these things cause 10 times the havoc in our lives, especially drug, alcohol. Food is a drug. There's a period of detox, understand that. But I never had a solution before in my life to all my problems. I was always the self, the ego is trying to figure it out, but my crazy thinking is what brought me here. So step one alone, like I always say, that's the whole program. Pretty much the whole basis is realizing my powerlessness. And then I can experience God joy and fill myself up with that. Spiritual abundance, spiritual bread. So have some spiritual bread tomorrow at the barbecue all day. You can have as much as you want of that. It's 0 calories.